Hello, and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today, you know him from his mini comic projects. Recently, he's wrapped up his amazing independent book with Matt Fraction, Sex Criminals, and he is still currently writing Daredevil at Marvel, and his most recent series is Stillwater with Ramon Perez. It's Chip Zdarsky. How are you doing, Chip?
Doing good, Jesse. How you doing?
Doing really good. I realized, are you doing more than just those two books right now? Because it feels like last time we talked, you were doing everything, and now you're just doing two books.
No, I'm working on, God, like 9 books right now.
Jeez.
It's one of those things where like everything's at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm kind of going through them in my head, like one of them, there's 5 issues drawn. The other, there's like 3 issues drawn, and those are like kind of creator-owned books.
Mm-hmm.
Corporate books, I got like 4, 5 different ones at different stages. Yeah, so it's that weird thing where it feels like, oh yeah, I'm just doing nothing, but no, I'm writing 2 scripts a week. I'm still struggling.
And last time I talked to you, I think you either just wrapped up or you were in the middle of drawing that Batman story
Oh
for
yeah.
and
Yeah.
again doing Sex Criminals and stuff like that. So now that you're not drawing it, do you feel like you're writing more, or do you feel like you just ate up that time with other stuff?
Well, I could see what was coming. Like I knew I had a lot of writing projects on the horizon that I was pushing off because of Sex Criminals. So they've filled the void quite easily, for better or worse. And it's funny. Like I haven't been drawing, and there was one project I'm doing for a company where we were having trouble figuring out who the artist should be, and I was just like, oh, maybe I should do it. Like, I don't know, I stopped drawing Sex Criminals. I love superheroes. I should draw some superheroes. And I mentioned it to my wife, and she was like, no, you're not doing that. Because she saw like how much energy Sex Criminals took out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a 40-hour-a-week job.
Yeah.
On top of all the scripting. So I'm taking a break from drawing. I'm talking to a publisher right now about a thing, but if I put pen to paper, it would probably be in the springtime.
Yeah,
Because it's just I'm just burnt out.
it feels like too that your wife probably would like to see you every once in a while.
Yeah. I mean, I never. That's the one thing about kind of growing into adulthood. I don't do all-nighters anymore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I always make sure that I'm kind of done work at like 5 or 6, so I can make dinner and spend an evening with the family. The trade-off is I usually get up pretty early to start work. Like today, I started at like 6:30 in the morning, just to make sure I kind of got through everything.
Yeah, it's kind of
So
weird
she
thing.
sees me the same. She sees me the same
Yeah.
amount if I'm drawing a book or if I'm not drawing a book. It's just I always manage to fill the time with other projects.
Yeah, it's always that weird thing too, because you think going into either like your passion or just like being an adult in general, you're like, I'll be able to sleep in on the weekends, I'll be able to do things that I want to do, and then like
Yeah.
now I'm up at between 6 and 7 at least every day, even when I don't have anything to do, I'm just up now, and
Yeah, it's weird.
body just like, hey, you can't stay up past midnight. Sorry about that.
Oh man, I remember the joys of sleeping in, just like luxuriating in bed, and I haven't done that in years.
Yeah,
Because there's always something to do. Like you
yeah.
wake up and you're just like, oh, okay. Especially when you're in an industry like comics, because there's people relying on you to do the
Mm-hmm.
thing. If I was just doing comics on my own, I wouldn't really stress it as much. But if I don't write a script, an artist doesn't draw, and if an artist doesn't draw, an artist doesn't get paid,
Yeah.
and that's always on my mind.
Yeah, and it's important, especially like that's what's so I think cool about artists who become writers, especially like prolific writers like you are right now. Like you're literally writing everything you can. It seems like at this point, either your own
Yeah,
ideas or all the IPs, and you understand that you got to get these things done for them, and you need to be able to write them so they can actually do them. Because you always hear those stories of people writing things like, "How am I supposed to end up drawing this?" and stuff like that.
yeah, and also like I mean, there are writers who are better at it than I am. Like I know some writers who can write a couple of pages at a time and send them to an artist. When they're behind, they can bounce between projects like that. I can't do that, so the pressure feels a bit more intense, knowing that I have to write the full script before I give it to the artist. Like I need to go through it and make sure it all gels together before someone starts drawing it.
Like, I'm curious now because I was listening to an interview with Dave Gibbons, and he talked about his writing projects that he would have to send to other artists. And his thing is like, I will never draw something for an artist to show what I'm trying to show. Like, I'll try my best to just describe it over and over again until
Yeah.
last resort's drawing. Are you the same way? Would you like just don't want to put any image in the artist's minds?
Yeah, I definitely not. I try to not even have the image in my mind when I'm writing, because when I first started writing for others, I had that, and so it was always a shock when I would get layouts or pages back from an artist, because I'd be like, well, that's not how I would draw it. So I try not to visualize it when I'm writing it. Like, I instinctually know, like, what kind of panels work on a
Mm-hmm.
page. Like, I'm never going to give them something impossible to draw. The only times I really sketch out what I mean for an artist is usually when it's a newer artist.
Gotcha.
Like if they've taken a few stabs at a thing and they're not getting what I'm asking, I'll do that, and I try to do it in a helpful way. I hope it comes across that way with some of the artists. And you know what's funny? The other thing I sometimes do, I've done it a couple of times, is with expressions. If an artist doesn't quite get the expression, I'll just send them a photo of me doing the expression.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, oh, like this, and then some goofy ass photo shows up on their inbox, and I'm sure they let out a heavy sigh as they realize I have to draw this clowny face.
And I picture that you just kind of do that in general, whatever projects you're working on. Like Matt just has a folder of your face, and you're like, I'm not even. He's like, I'm not drawing this. You are.
Yeah, basically.
And I guess like that's so great about the modern age too, is reference photos are so easy to just recreate. Like whenever you need to, it's like, hey, look at me. This is what I'm doing. Or if you're drawing, you're like, I can just pose real fast and take those pictures, and then go on
Oh
to
God,
drawing.
yeah. As an artist, like even when I was kind of doing my own comics back in the day, like early 2000s, like I was the first of my friends to buy a digital camera.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a ton of money on this dumb little box that because it was revelatory. The fact that I could take photos of myself
Mm-hmm.
or my friends and immediately have them. I didn't have to take them in to get developed, which I was doing before that for illustration jobs. I'd take a lot of reference photos and take them to the photo mart to get developed, and having it so instantaneous was just like it was a game changer. And now it's like everything has a camera on it, so it doesn't feel quite as special. But yeah, I highly recommend any young artist use as much reference as possible. It's kind of the only way you learn.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're drawing things that exist, right? Like even if you're like drawing spaceships and stuff like that, you're drawing things based off things that already exist. So you kind of have to know the references to get there.
Yeah, like I have a mixture of like I use Google searching
Mm-hmm.
images of stuff. Street view is amazing. Like if I really want a feel of a neighborhood, like I can just like it's like I'm driving a car down the street and taking
Mm-hmm.
reference photos as I go.
Less cops
Google
involved in
SketchUp.
doing that now with the Google Street View too.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel like a pervert. Yeah, and Google SketchUp for 3D modeling of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Cars, especially, like I'll just find models of cars so I can get the angles a bit easier and combine that with like reference photos of the actual car, so it can make it seem somewhat realistic. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It feels like anyone can make comics, but I also know that's not really true. Like of a certain quality, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not as easy as tracing an image. There's obviously more to it than that.
But I think at this point, and I mean, we'll say probably this 10 years down the road too, but at this point, it's probably the easiest to at least dip your toes in the water with comics than it probably was ever before.
Yeah. Like if you're a writer and you can't find an artist, like there's so many ways you can make a comic. So many
Photoshop it
ways.
together.
Yeah, really, you could just Photoshop it together and just like spend a day and just like trace it out.
Yeah.
Like it'll be a very basic comic that might not look the best, but you can tell your story your way without having to rely on waiting for an artist that may never deliver for your independent project.
So speaking about independent projects too, like the biggest reason I wanted to talk to you is about Stillwater. Like it's only 2 issues are out currently, right?
The third one came out last week. Yeah.
Last week. Okay, I haven't got to the comic book store until next week, so I will pick it
Yeah.
up
No
when I get
problem.
there then. But when you told me about it before, and you told like it was a horror story, and it's like about people who just can't die, and I'm like, Chip doing horror? Like, it's always been comedy or like really heavy drama, but horror, right?
Yeah.
And then you get. I got the preview pages. I was looking at those. I'm like, oh, this is not what I expected. And then I read the first issue, which I will not. I don't want to spoil the end of that first issue, but the end of that first
Yeah.
issue, you're reading that, you're like, did Chip really? Did he write this? Like, did he do this to a person?
Yeah. Yeah. Feels a little weird. I
Um,
mean, there are a lot of similarities between comedies and horror.
mm-hmm.
They both rely on shock and surprise, and they
Yeah,
both in comics they rely on the page turn reveal. So a lot of it's kind of using the same muscles in terms of writing.
and with Stillwater, it's about so if anybody doesn't know, it's about a very small town where no one can die within the town. Like
Mhm.
if you look at any of the previews for the comic, you'll see a kid jumping off a building, breaking his neck, and then a minute later he's up and running. Um,
Yeah.
and it's about someone coming back to that town and kind of figuring out what's going on here, what's the mystery.
Mhm.
And it honestly reminds me quite a bit of Joshua Williamson's Nailbiter, the original one, about how like you didn't know what's going on in the
Okay.
town,
Yeah.
and it slowly reveals that everybody's very twisted. And like even 2 issues in, I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
no one's here is right. No one is right in this town. Like you already can feel that.
Yeah.
So my question really
Yeah. I mean,
about
that the
it.
one of the
Yeah.
things that one of the things I enjoy exploring about the idea with Ramon is how this would affect everyone
Mhm.
mentally. Because after a while of kind of experiencing life that way, you just wouldn't be right in the head, or you would have
Mhm.
evolved to something a little different in terms of like how you handle situations and your moral outlook on the universe. So that's been really interesting. Yeah, I know. Like with Nailbiter, it's like um, I think every writer at some point plays with the creepy small town trope
Yeah.
because it's so much fun, and especially if you ever lived in a small town,
Mhm.
you know there's a lot of truth to be mined there.
And for this one too, it's a small town, but it feels like a full town. Like there's a full business, there's full
Hmm.
happenings everywhere. So
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like it's rural or like no one knows what's technology or anything like that. It just feels like everybody is cautious of everybody that they don't know. Like if they don't know the
yeah,
face, they're all cautious. Um,
yeah, and that's a real thing from small towns. Like
yeah.
when I was a kid and my family moved to a small town, it was like a town of 1,000. Um, People looked at us weird because they didn't recognize us.
Hmm.
Which is a very strange feeling. And as a kid, I didn't notice it as much as my parents did. Um, they felt very much like outsiders from the moment we got to this town,
Hmm.
and you just don't have that feeling in a bigger city.
And how long did you live in that small town though? Like was it like a good chunk of time or was it just like a few years?
It was 3 years, kind of formative ones for me, grade 4 through 6.
Hmm.
And I loved it there. I had a lot of friends, but I wasn't really privy to what my parents were going through being in that small town and their
Hmm.
kind of desperate need to get away from it. Because we moved there because of my dad's work, and basically, uh, he came to realize that maybe a commute isn't that bad,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah. No,
and
for
we moved
sure.
we moved half an hour out of the town to a much larger city, because yeah, it wasn't the best of times for them there.
And did you? I'm really curious now that you say that wasn't the best of times for them. And you don't remember much about like kind of how dark the town was. Like, did you talk to your parents about their experiences to get like reference material for this, or did you just kind of base it off of things you know about it?
No, not I mean not specifically for this. Like over the years, growing up, I would hear things, and I would see a few things as a kid. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, my dad was in charge of the local phone company because it was during a time when you could have a local phone company.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like AT&T or whatever. It was
Yeah.
it was like just like a weird switchboard kind of thing. for a couple towns. And I remember one night, like the old man across the street banging on our door because his phone wasn't working, and my dad answered the door, and he was like, "Yeah, we'll fix it in the morning. Like, there's like 3 of us that work at this phone company. Like, we'll fix it."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching this old man take a swing at my dad, like, like it's just like, because he's like, yo, fuck you, yo, because yeah, like it's a small town, and my dad calls the cop, who he also knows, and
Mm-hmm.
the cop's suspicious of my dad, and because he's still the outsider, and it's all weird, very weird.
And like that definitely shows, like that kind of experience shows up. I feel like in issue 2 with a certain character coming to pick up another certain character from the police station, and how
Mm-hmm.
they interact with everybody. It's like, oh no, even if they're not like in the position of power, they still hold weight over these people
Yeah.
because of how well they know each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's the most fascinating dynamic, is just because someone's in power in that town in the comic, it already feels like that doesn't mean they're controlling what we think they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And to build up to, like, how long ago did you have the idea for Stillwater?
Oh my God, I had the idea in like 2016,
Okay.
and during that period, I was doing a lot, like sex criminals and a bunch of Marvel stuff, and I knew I didn't have time to do a proper image book, because that would have entailed me kind of like finding the artist, colorist, letterer, coordinating between them all, doing solicitation, all that stuff, and so the idea felt very skybound.
Yeah.
And so one of my editors on Howard the Duck had moved to Skybound, and so it was an easy enough email, like, "Hey, you remember me from like a couple years ago? I got this idea. What do you think?" And they went for it. So I wrote the first script for it for them in 2017, and Skybound, kind of wisely, they like to get a lot of issues in the can. Like they spend a long time on a project just to make sure it comes out on time, and they've thought it all through. So basically that's why it's taken like 3 years for issue 1 to even come out, because I'd had to write like 4 scripts before we even brought Ramon on board, and even at that point they wanted an issue 5, and I'm just like, I need art. I need to see this world before I keep going with it. But the plus side is, we're a lot of issues ahead, so it's nice knowing that the book is going to be able to come out on time.
And in 2016, when you were coming up with the idea, in my mind, it's like everything I consume inspires what I create in a lot of ways. Do you remember what you were like indulging in at the time that might have made Stillwater show up in your brain, or is it just one of those ideas that just popped up one day and you have no idea where it came from?
Well, it's one of those things where I think every writer kind of like thinks about immortality. They think about like stories that are involving, vampires or just beings that live a long time. So I always wanted to do something along those lines, but then I just started to think about the reality of it, and what if this happened to someone who was not glamorous?
Yeah.
Because when you think of vampires, it's always like kind of the sexy dudes. And I'm like, what if it just happened to like the old guy down the street, and happened to the woman that works at the coffee shop? And then, I often think about that small town that I spent those years in, and going back to it a few years ago with my brother just to kind of see it. And nothing had changed, like almost nothing. Like there was no new shops, there were no new buildings. Like it was exactly the same as when we were kids, and the people just kind of look the same too. Like fashion and ideas just don't catch up to small town as quickly as they do everywhere else. And I think that's what kind of started the idea of like time stood still in the town. Like that's what I could see. That's what my brother could see, and I think that fed into my ideas of doing a story about the pitfalls of immortality. So yeah, all those things just kind of came together, and yeah, no, I have to give it to my father-in-law who came up with the name, because
It's
I
a
had the idea.
it's a great name too, but my brain always wants to say stillborn. I'm like, that's not it. That's not it at
No,
all.
no, no.
That's a different
Yeah,
story.
yeah, no, I remember, like, because that was the one thing I was stuck on, because I'm like, I want to name it after the town, but like the town I grew up in was Coldwater,
Hmm.
and that didn't sound quite right for a title. And yeah, my father-in-law was like, well, how about Stillwater? Everything stands still. I'm like, oh my god, that's perfect.
And like
And he's never let me forget it.
what's great about that title too is it kind of puts like for anybody that just like thinks about things a bit too much, it puts a little bit of horror in your brain when you hear the title too, because
Yeah,
anybody that thinks about still water thinks like stagnant water and like the garbage that gets made into that and stuff. And you're like, what? The city's polluted then by the immortality in that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Stillwater, it's not a good thing. It doesn't
Yeah.
conjure a good visual. The only real downside I've found to naming it that is that I guess the band in Almost Famous is called Stillwater.
Oh.
And so, ever since the announcement, every third tweet is like, "Is this about the band?"
Well, if it
And I'm
makes you
like,
feel like
"No."
that, I'm not seeing Almost Famous.
Yeah, no. I mean, I saw it when it came out, and I don't recall that at all. But yeah,
Um, yeah, this is one of those series I've been really excited about since I kind of saw the previews and reading each issue. I'm upset that it's not bi-weekly, but I know how insane an image book being bi-weekly is. But I just kind of want to
yeah.
just know what happens next so much. And
Well, like, luckily, like I said, because of
yeah,
our tight schedule on it, like, it'll be monthly. There won't be like big breaks between arcs, I don't think.
but for you in writing it, are you excited for you to figure out what's next, or do you kind of already know the whole plan of it all?
I knew kind of the major plot points before I started scripting it all out. But as I've gone, like, as I kind of introduce new characters and situations, that kind of keeps it interesting for me, because I know
Hmm.
where we're headed, but I'm like, oh, but what if we detoured down here and saw what happened with that character, and what does this mean for this character? And that's been fun. Uh, so it's both like a tight and a loose thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like there are key moments that are definitely happening, and kind of the road to kind of get to those is, I'm trying to leave it a little vague, but
Hmm.
that's hard for me. Like, as soon as I start to write an issue, I kind of go back to the master list and kind of add all the ideas and tighten the whole storyline up.
For you, because I know it's Skybound, there are a lot of the main series in Skybound, like Walking Dead, Invincible, and a few others. Like they have other people playing in those worlds every once in a while. Like even
Mm.
and Stillwater is such a big idea of so many people in this town living this life. Do you have any plans of letting other people kind of do little stories in this, kind of exploring characters that you would never touch?
It's tricky because it's kind of a small enough town that uh, everything that happens in a book affects everyone. So it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to pull out kind of side characters and side stories from that. Um, I do have some ideas for where it's going, where other people would be able to play a little bit more with it,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't see it happening. Like, partly because I like the idea of like keeping it as a tight narrative.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, uh, yeah, yeah, it's a tricky one.
It's one of those things though too, where it's like when you build a world, it's I feel like it's hard to share sometimes when you build a world too. It's like
Hmm.
when I would create something, or I had a friend create something, it's like, hey, how about this? Like, no, I got a plan. I got a plan here. You can't mess with this plan. So like with big concepts like that, I always wonder how our writers let others play in those worlds with them.
I mean, it's a little similar to the Marvel stuff. Like, if I was going to do something with Spider-Man, I would have to
Hmm.
run it by Nick Spencer and Nick Lowe, uh, depending on what they're doing and like what characters they have in play, and like, you always have to kind of navigate around stuff like that. Uh, it depends on the nature of the creators as well. Like,
Yeah.
I just wrote a Black Hammer one shot,
Hmm.
um, and so I got to choose which character, and I pitched the story, and Jeff Lemire is like, everything I've heard about Jeff and what I know of him as a friend, like he's an amazing collaborator
Yeah.
because he just lets you do whatever, unless it really veers wildly off of what he needs from those characters. He's super accommodating to writers and artists. So yeah, that's an example of it being done quite well. All the Black Hammer stuff.
And kind of jumping about like crossover stuff. I know you have, don't you have a King in Black Daredevil story tie-in?
Yeah.
What's so fascinating about tie-ins, and I want to kind of get your perspective on this too, is it feels like either the tie-in is really forced to kind of work with like what's going on narratively in the big story and event, but
Yeah.
sometimes tie-ins really just work by themselves as a narrative structure to move on your personal story. Like I read the Empire what's Aftershock or whatever for Guardians, and it's
Yeah.
Ali just doing a cool mystery with Rocket, but it ends with the King in Black like tease for
Yeah.
Knowles coming, and I'm like, so this is how like he was able to progress his story but keep it all kind of together. Do you play it that way, or do you kind of just lean heavily into the crossover?
So it's interesting because when I started working at Marvel, I was doing Howard the Duck, and we only had like 5 issues before Secret Wars happened.
Okay.
And my editor at the time said, "Hey, so here's what's going to happen. Like in 5 issues, like we're effectively being canceled and rebooted on the other end of Secret Wars, but you can continue a story using all the Secret Wars stuff in the meantime." And he said, like, if you tie into Secret Wars, it'll help boost sales. And I was like, but it'll mess the story. So I opted not to do that. I think, I'm friends with Ryan North, and he did the same thing with Squirrel Girl. He's like, I'll pick it up after.
Yeah.
And I've kind of like, whenever I've been offered the opportunity to be a part of a crossover, I tend to shy away from it because I really like the book standing up on its own, like on the shelf. Like I don't think, you don't want to pick up like a Punisher story where it's all like gritty and stuff, and then for 2 issues he's I don't know, like fighting in space.
Yeah.
Because that's what the crossover determines. Like that stuff doesn't really work for me. But as the King in Black stuff was being kind of like talked about at Marvel, around the same time I interviewed Ann Nocenti, who was like my favorite writer on Daredevil. Like I love her run. And before I interviewed her, I reread the run, and she did like 2 back-to-back big crossover things. She did Follow the Mutants and Inferno, like 2 X-Men crossovers, and Daredevil tied into them. And they were so well done. Like the Follow the Mutants one was basically just New York kind of going into blackness. Like that was basically it. Like there's a big fight with X-Factor and Apocalypse, and the side effect is New York, had a big power outage, and people thought it was the end of the world. And she told a really beautiful story kind of about that, about the street level characters, which was a super smart decision. And during Inferno, kind of a similar deal. Like she played with the street level of what was happening and how it affects Daredevil, and those are expertly done. And so when the King in Black stuff was presented to me, I started to think about what Jonathan Hickman would say in Retreats when talking about crossovers, which is you got to play nice with others. You got to support the other creators when they're doing these big things. Like you want to help each other. You do it by telling a good story that ties into it. And so I was like, okay, what can I do here? Like where it falls in the Daredevil story, how is this going to work? And once the idea clicked for me, it made a ton of sense, and was additive to the Daredevil story and advanced the characters in a way that I needed them to advance in the overall story. So that helped a lot. Like they're not, if you took the 2 issues out, the King in Black issues of the run wouldn't make any sense. So that means they're integral to the run. Yeah. They're integral to the story, which is a super nice thing.
And those are my favorite kind of crossover issues because sometimes I'll try to read a series and there's a crossover. And I'm like, oh, I didn't read any of the crossover. I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was definitely doing that with older books recently. It was just like,
Yeah.
should I track these down to kind of make sense of
Hmm.
everything? And it's so nice though when they can stand up on their own. And with
Yeah.
Daredevil, you're at such an interesting pivotal moment. It feels like it would be weird to derail for 2 issues at this point.
I know 2025 is a big issue. Where kind of, everything changes.
Yeah.
But 26 and 27 is a great opportunity to show what that change means
Mm-hmm.
in the characters' lives. So it's really come along at a nice time for me. And I'm grateful the fact that it's a choice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think if we were a lower selling book on the verge of cancellation, Marvel would be like, you have to do this.
Yeah.
But I think we're steady enough that they're just like, hey, if you do it, great. That'll help you. It'll help us. But if you don't, no problem.
And about your Daredevil too, something I'm glad I get to say to you in person. That annual that you made for Daredevil is one of the most stellar pieces of pulling up old lore and making it matter in a lot of ways.
Oh, wow. Thanks, man.
Because I'm feeling the same way with Donny Cates' Thor currently, with him bringing back Thomas
Mm-hmm.
Blake and like that being
Yeah.
a crazy thing. And
Yeah.
reading that, I'm like, oh, did Chip just make this full on canon staying forever? No one's gonna debate this anymore. And I'm like, I'm here for this. And then the last issue that I don't know, I believe it's the last issue that's out. It feels like the tease of that is, oh, this is the annual coming back now.
Yeah.
With kind of the two characters. And so
Yeah,
I'm excited to
exactly.
see how that plays in and how Matt's gonna get out of this one.
Yeah. I mean, um, in Charles Soule's run, I was a huge fan of Mike Murdock.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was just, it was a really fun idea to kind of make that character real. And I wanted to use him in my run, but I found the only catch was it's hard to introduce him
Mm-hmm.
without referencing how he came to be,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody knew he was Matt's twin brother, and he's not really his twin brother. And there's an Inhuman named the Reader, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot at play there. And I wanted to make it just a little bit cleaner, bringing him back by just being like, oh, he's always been his brother.
Yeah.
Because that introduces kind of fun story possibilities for myself and for
Mm-hmm.
whoever follows me on the book.
Yeah.
Someone might undo it. Someone might undo all of it. Like, I have no idea. And for myself, though, having him as a foil, and not having to explain to everyone, he's the twin brother, but he's not real, but he is.
Yeah.
Like, just everyone accepts it now because that's what the history dictates. That was a fun one. I'm glad Marvel gave me the chance to do it in that annual, because it was too big a story to do in one issue of the regular series, and we couldn't really have 2-3 issues of Daredevil without Daredevil.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. And like, it would pick up the annual might be a little thrown off, but like, one of my favorite things like a writer can do with a character who's been around for a long time is taking something that we take for granted and twisting that. And like, again, Matt's brother, Thor's secret identity, or even Bendis taking away Clark's secret identity in Superman. It's like those, or now James taking away Bruce's millions or billions in Batman. Like, those small things that we take for granted because they're just part of the character, and like now they're shifted to be pivotal plot points. Are so much fun.
These characters have been around for so long. Anything you can do to create more questions for the character's storyline,
without killing
to
them,
expand it. I mean, it's a lot of us. I've already mentioned him, but Hickman. Hickman's been on record of saying, he wants to be additive.
Yeah.
and that's really evident in the X-Men
Oh yeah.
books right now. And you know, I take that to heart, and I think what we're doing with Daredevil right now is reflective of kind of the ethos he's trying to bring to the X-Men books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to kind of have to beat Matt down every once in a while to build him back up. But
yeah,
what can we add to his life to create more interesting stories with him?
and that's Matt's essence as a character in a lot of ways. Is he's just a boxer that deep down, like he takes the punches and then he figures out what's the next strategy after he gets beaten up a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of Hickman's great work on X-Men right now, and you kind of trying to follow that same essence, when are we going to get the battle Shonen Battle Arena Daredevil arc? Because I'm ready for that.
Well, stay tuned.
That's been one of the things I was like reading Extra Swords, and I'm like, is Hickman just writing a manga battle arc right now? Like, is that what's happening?
Kinda, yeah. It works.
It works, and it's super rad. I'm like, yeah, we should pull from manga more in Western comics.
Yeah, well, we've got stuff coming up in Daredevil that maybe will fill that void.
To kind of move on to some questions I got from Twitter, because I don't want to keep you too late. I know it's later over there.
Yeah, no problem.
One person, the people asked a lot of like questions that don't really fit my show, so I picked the ones that kind of did fit.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
Yeah. So one person on Twitter named Prince CPO. I love Twitter because you never know what's an actual name, what's not.
Yeah.
Is curious if we're gonna figure out how the city in Stillwater works, like the economy and stuff. And are you gonna deep dive how they get supplies, how they kind of survive? Because that's what's so fascinating. Is they're old town, but they're thriving still, technically.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy when you don't need anything to survive.
That's okay. That's a good point.
And you know, the longer you live, the more you can save, and the more you can take advantage of your immortality in a lot of ways. We get into it a little bit. Issue 3 kind of talks a bit about kind of how things work as we go forward. There's I think around issue 10, 11, we kind of get into a bit more of the economics of things. But really, like, you don't, if you don't need much to survive, you can maintain a life quite easily. So yeah, that's the interesting thing about the town.
And Sarah Large asks 2 questions. One is like, will there be merch for Stillwater? Which I'm always super fascinated to see people pull out merch for comics. I'm excited to see if you have anything planned.
I mean, that's a Skybound thing. So the interesting thing about the deal is, like, I don't own Stillwater. It's I brought them the idea. They own the idea now, and I financially, the way it works is I get a percentage of whatever gets made. So that's it, all that stuff's entirely out of my hands. I think there's not a huge chance of a lot of merch, only because there's no conventions to sell them at, which I think was a big. It was a big place to sell stuff like merch, and even comic shops, especially with, you know, kind of curbside pickup. It's not really a time and a place for merch T-shirts, because those are kind of a browsing thing, and not a, you know, checking the list in your previous catalog thing. So we'll see. I'd love something, you know. Whenever Sex Criminals merch would happen, I always got super excited. So, or even like when Howard the Duck would show up in something, I would get super excited.
Yeah. She also asked, which character do you think Ramon nailed the best in his art? And like, how
he's so good. God, which one? Like I love them all. Like, it's that's a really that's a tough one. Like Daniel is perfect. Like he's we needed to kind of create a character who you could root for, but also you kind of want a face that's a little punchable, because we do put him through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And Ramon really nailed it, I think. Yeah, it was such a. I mean, I've known Ramon for years, and it was such a thrill to see him kind of create these characters through the scripts. Because, like I said before, I wrote like 4 issues before Ramon was brought on board to start writing or drawing, and it was hard for me because at that point I'm just like I started to kind of lose track of like the voices of characters, because I didn't have that visual to like tie them back to. And then once Ramon came on board, like it really cemented how they sound and act in my mind. Oh, I will say Mrs. Lillo. She shows up in issue 3, and that's probably my the most delight I've taken at seeing Ramon draw a character.
Now I'm excited to pick up my books next week.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of wrap up the talk and everything about Sex Criminals. You wrapped that up this year with Matt, and it's been going since I've been aware of independent books, it feels like. And
wow.
It's one of those things, like independent books weren't my thing until I like was buying books myself, and I got to pick and choose things more so.
Of course, yeah.
And it just feels like it's kind of an end of an era of the independent book scene in a lot of ways. Now that like Saga's still on pause and Walking Dead's done, and just a lot of those books that kind of like show like independent books are like back and ready to throw things in your face again.
Yeah. It's funny, like when it's weird, you know. I don't know about end of an era, like but we kind of came on the scene at a very specific time. Like I think it was us, Wicked and Divine, Bitch Planet. Saga was before us, and that I think, you know, led the way. But yeah, there were a lot of kind of like titles that just kind of, you know, really hit it out of the gate. And, you know, like you said, Saga's on pause, Wicked and Divine's over, Bitch Planet. Hopefully we're getting more of that. Yeah, it's interesting to see these things in waves, and kind of knowing that we're kind of wrapping up and stepping off the stage. I just keep thinking like, well, what's the next wave? You know, there's some really promising stuff, like Donnie and Jeff's crossover is massive and cool, and you know, Ministry of Truth and Undiscovered Country. Like those are all really kind of big, cool kind of Image titles, and that makes me excited for kind of the future of the company.
And like I feel like I'm picking more and more independent books every month when new one shots come out or issue ones, and like seeing another generation of Kubrick's like doing comics as an Image book though. It's like, oh wow, like this is rad to see just the lineage too within independent work sometimes.
Yeah,
lineage, you know what, big twos moving into independent.
Yeah, and I think it's a good leap for creators to make. Like I kind of went around it a little backwards, going Sex Criminals to Marvel, but you know, I'm a Marvel DC reader, and I enjoy those books. But seeing these creators do the books at Image, where anything can happen in the books, and the stakes are so much higher. Like when characters die in like Sex Criminals or Bitch Planet or in Crossover or Ministry of Truth, like they're dead.
Yeah,
like, that's it. That's the last you'll see of that character. Like they're not gonna, you know, pop up and like when the next writer takes over, because there is no next writer. I enjoy how unlimited the books feel in terms of where they can go.
And for the most part, except for like 1 or 2 books, like they're at some point this book will end, and like there will be conclusion, and the story will have to come to some kind of satisfying or not satisfying, just some kind of conclusion, and you kind of have to live with that. Where Batman, God willing, will live forever in some ways.
Yeah, and like Matt Fraction kind of put it the best to me once, in which he said that writing a book for Marvel or DC, you're constantly writing a second act, which means you don't really do the act 1 because everyone knows where the characters come from. You don't really write the act 3 because you can't finish the story for the character.
Mm-hmm.
You're shepherding it through however many issues you have, kind of just keeping the ball going, like
Mm-hmm.
constantly introducing conflict that the character needs to overcome, constant. And then you step off the stage and somebody else picks up the ball and continues that act two. Whereas, with sex criminals, like we had a beginning, a middle, and an end for the characters. Or, the book I just did for Comixology, Afterlift.
Yeah.
That was super satisfying. And I didn't realize until I was like kind of in the middle of planning it out, like why it felt so good to write it. Was because it was a total story. It was 5 issues. I knew exactly where the character needed to go. I knew where the character had to end up, and I was able to write it all and have it as a total book, which is a really satisfying feeling after doing a lot of Marvel work, which is fun to do, but hard to put a bow on it at the end.
Yeah. Well, Chip, thank you for talking with me about all of this. It's just been a good time talking with you again.
Pleasure mine.
You always feel like I always feel like you're the well of Chip, and I'm always fishing out like really cool like things that I've never heard before, and that's fun. Maybe that's what they should call your word balloon episodes, just the well of Chip.
The well of Chip. But that sounds good.
Again, you guys can pick up Daredevil and Stillwater and like the trades of sex criminals and all the other stuff Chip's done. But Chip, do you know your Twitter handle off your top of your head?
Zdarsky. That's me.
And
straight to the point.
Yeah, and you can follow this show on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod, Facebook at facebook.com/comicsmatter. You can email me at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. If you have any questions for future guest stories about how comics impacted you or want to be a guest on the show, you can reach me at any of those. Don't forget to leave a review at your favorite platform and tell all your friends about the show. The logo of the show is done by my friend Steven. The theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. And lastly, guys, remember, especially around the holidays right now, be good to one another.